be affected by this. That effort will continue. But we have to understand that now the federal government is going to have a much, much more difficult role in trying to find some way to restrain climate change and direct health impacts from coal-based pollution. So our fundamental message this morning is that we have done some great work in attempting to meet our climate goals in the state of Washington, but we have to redouble our efforts. We have to increase our commitment. We have to accelerate our efforts to reduce carbon pollution in the state of Washington in the upcoming years. And that's necessary because the federal government now is going to be, frankly, much less effective in restraining pollution, which means more of that burden is going to be on our shoulders. And we are willing to accept that because Washington state is not going to allow climate change to swallow our state. Our forest fires are devastating our forests. Our kids can't go outside in the summer sometimes because of forest fire smoke. Our salmon are becoming endangered because the water is literally too hot to allow them to swim upstream. And people are getting respiratory diseases. Our kids have an epidemic of asthma, and we will not tolerate that. So our central message this morning is that we have to make sure that our existing measures are actually come to fruition. Most importantly, the Climate Commitment Act, which is calling for a reduction with the most environmentally just law in the United States, thanks to these legislators on this call and others, that actually is effectuated. And we know that the fossil fuel companies are going to challenge that. We know that we have some more work to do to get that regulation in place. We'll need to make sure that's effectuated. We need to make sure our low carbon fuel standard is effectuated. And we need to move further to meet our state goals, because despite our tremendous work, we're still not meeting our state goals, even with the existing policies we have. So one of the things we will need to do is to restrain the future use of dirty gas. Dirty gas is the gas that is increasing the asthma rates of our children when it's used in our homes. The Medical Association just issued a warning about the health impacts of dirty gas by increasing the rates of asthma of our children and other respiratory diseases. A new decision came out just a few days ago about new scientific findings that we have benzene and other carcinogens we have now found have been released into our homes by dirty gas of other carcinogens in increasing amounts more than we originally thought. So that's one of the things our state is going to be involved in to restrain the further pollution of dirty gas in our homes and using alternate means of heating and cooking, which we know are effective. Microsoft just been very happy moving to inductive range tops, which they like even better than their gas range tops. So that is a further effort we will have to make. And of course, the polluting industries are spending millions of dollars to try to similarly kneecap our efforts in the state of Washington. And we will have to be now doubly alert to prevent them from going backwards when it comes to climate change. So we are sounding the alarm, and we are proud of what we've done, but this decision makes it clear that we will have to accelerate our efforts when it comes to climate change and carbon pollution. Excuse me just for a moment. So with that, I'd like to turn over to Reuven Carlisle, who is moving on, but has helped lead us to date with Joe and many others in the legislature on these matters. Reuven.
Thanks so much, Governor. It's a pleasure to join you and everyone else. I think we all have to acknowledge that it is extremely difficult not to see this Supreme Court ruling as anything other than ideological versus legal. It is a pretty jolting reality check that it seems like the goal itself is to eviscerate the ability of the EPA to implement enterprise-wide or system-wide or nationwide policies. The governor is absolutely right in all of the work we have to do. In the 1980s, there were just a very few politicians in this country who had the moral courage and the prescience to stand up to understand climate impacts. And that was folks like Al Gore and Jay Inslee and just a very few others. And here we are today dealing with the cold, hard reality of forest fires and ocean acidification and all the other issues. Our state emits about 100 million metric tons of emissions, and we need to emit 5 million metric tons by 2050 in order to reach science-based net zero targets. And what that means is that we have to reduce emissions while we grow our economy, grow our population, grow our clean jobs, and move forward. So that means we need the kind of policies that we've implemented at the state level, but we need a partner in the federal government. That partnership seems to be a one-way street these days. It's deeply unsettling on every level. The issue of delegated authorities sounds like a bureaucratic mumbo jumbo, but put it in context. In California, AB 32, the legislation that created their carbon emissions program, was 8 pages long. They delegated the authority to the agency to implement the technical operational details associated with decarbonization. In our state, we provided dozens and dozens of pages of legislation in climate, but there's still delegated authority to the technical and the operational experts at the agency. Every bill in every state, nationwide, every year has an element, almost without exception, of delegating authority to the technical experts. And now our friends in Washington, D.C., who don't know how to turn on a computer half the time, are saying that they have to pass a bill that is explicit on every single technical element of climate action. And that is categorically ridiculous, upside down and backwards. And as the governor said, the deep decarbonization of our electricity sector is underway, but we need partnership with not just industry and our consumer-owned utilities, but also the federal government. We need more renewable energy facilities. We need to site more facilities. We need help in making sure that we do that. That means offshore wind, onshore wind, community solar, electrification, and so much more. We need the Clean Fuel Standard, the Cap and Invest program. We need building decarbonization. We need electrification of transportation. All of these policies are not in isolation. They're nationwide. We need a stronger partnership in the federal government. And the Supreme Court has pulled back from that partnership in terms of the most modest level of authority that the EPA needs to be a strong partner with cities, with counties, and with states. So the Pacific Coast, from British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, and California, many other states are moving forward. And market forces are making renewable energy cheaper and coal and gas and other fossil fuel-based systems more expensive. That's underway, both regulatory and market forces. It's unstoppable. But it's unconscionable that the federal government, under the Supreme Court ruling, has retreated from its central role as a meaningful partner in this work. So the governor is 100% spot on that we are on the journey, but we need to move forward even more. We need to implement and execute and effectively deliver these programs in partnership with other states, with the region and nationwide. And it's really deeply unsettling and unfortunate that the federal government has made a choice to put the ideological fervency of anti-climate action ahead of the operational and the legal implications and issues associated with common sense delegated authority that, again, in a constitutional republic, virtually every legislative entity worldwide, arguably, has an element of delegated authority the way the court has eviscerated today. So it's unfortunate, but fortunately we live in a state that is deeply committed to this work, which we believe, I believe, and all of us, I think, believe is very much aligned with the values, the economic, the social interests of the people of this state. And that's an urban issue, it's a rural issue, it's deeply embedded in environmental justice and equity, and it's about using the resources in a more responsible way so that we can decarbonize while we continue to grow a 21st century economy. Thanks so much. And I'm happy to hand it off to Representative Fitzgibbon.
Go
Thanks.
ahead, Joe.
I think it's a little ironic that we're here talking about the Supreme Court kneecapping the EPA's ability to regulate greenhouse gas pollution almost exactly a year after the heat dome event of the 2021 summer. It was on June 28th, 2021, when we cracked the all-time record by a lot at SeaTac Airport of 108 degrees Fahrenheit. And as folks, I'm sure will recall, we know we lost at least 700 lives across the Pacific Northwest in that event. And that was based on many of your reporting, but we also know that it could have been higher. And that's just one example of the extreme weather events that Washington and the United States and the entire world are experiencing that were made possible because of the effects of human-caused climate change. So, just about a year out on that, nearly a year out from that event, we had the Supreme Court kneecapping the EPA's ability to regulate greenhouse gas pollution from the power sector. And essentially what we have is a federal government that's tied itself into knots to prevent itself from addressing the greatest challenge of our day, between an out of control Supreme Court. As we well know, this is just the latest of a series of extreme radical decisions that they've made in this term, to a US Senate that is gridlocked due to a filibuster rule that's an outdated, antiquated rule, preventing them from taking action on the major issues of the day. That, to me, that's an answer to the question of why is Washington moving so aggressively on climate change? Why don't you just wait for the federal government? We can't wait for the federal government because they have proven themselves incapable in this moment of rising to this challenge. I hope they still do rise to the challenge. I hope they are still able to pass a reconciliation bill that invests in tax credits for things like electric vehicles and clean energy generation and heat pumps. But we can't wait for that. We've been waiting for too long for the federal government to take action. I hope that the EPA will be able to sift through the wreckage of their authority and salvage some solutions to regulate greenhouse gas pollution from the power sector. But we can't wait on them to do that, and that's why we're moving aggressively forward with our Clean Energy Transformation Act, with our Climate Commitment Act, with our Low Carbon Fuel Standard, with our Green Buildings Act, and with strong, ambitious action, including just this week at the State Building Code Council to decarbonize our building sector. But we have much more to do, and I think that's what you're hearing from us today is our commitment, irrespective of what happens back in Washington, D.C., to continue our role as the national leader among states on climate change. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Representative Dewar.
Thank you, Rep. Fitzgibbon and Governor and Senator Carlisle. It's troubling because we're already struggling to rein in climate change and provide a livable planet for future generations. And now a serious blow has been dealt to our efforts. SCOTUS is basically saying there are a lot of fires, but we can only fight certain fires. And we live in a state that's really proactive on these issues, but America has many states and many sources of pollution. And I think something I'd like to highlight is that pollution is an environmental justice issue. We know that power plants are America's #1 source of deadly pollution, contributing to tens of thousands of deaths and hundreds of thousands of illnesses every year. And those impacts fall disproportionately on burdened communities of color. Even when factors like region and income level are taken into account, communities of color breathe more air pollution than white people. Black Americans are harmed most of all. Black people are more likely to live near power plants than white people, and Black children are more likely to have asthma than white children by 2 times. So it's really incumbent upon us, not just in Washington, but the entire country, to deal with this issue if we want to be a country of equity. The other thing I'd like to highlight is that we know that the capital costs for producing new energy is cheapest with solar and wind. And so we are moving in the right direction, and we have a lot to be proud of and a lot of things, that are coming together in this moment, but this is definitely a serious blow to our efforts. And I hope that other states can follow the lead of the West Coast and overcome this very serious kneecapping of the federal government's ability to fight climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may, just additional comment for return for questions. We have to recognize that our state will also be attacked by polluting industries in the months and years to come in an effort to roll back our provisions. There is already a multi-million-dollar campaign on our airways to try to attack the ability in Washington state of our ability to protect our clean air. And so what you've seen from the Republican court-packed Supreme Court, you're seeing right here in the state of Washington as well. So that's why we're raising this alarm. Our ability to protect ourselves from dirty gas now is subject to a multi-million-dollar campaign to fool people and to think that dirty gas is somehow healthy. The American Medical Association has or shortly will issue a health warning to people about the dangers to ourselves and to our children of increasing asthma and other diseases as associated by using gas in our homes. And this polluting industry is trying to attack our ability to actually act here in our state. So we have to know that we will need the Biden administration to be as creative as possible to use other laws that we may be able to use to restrain coal-based pollution. But this is a huge hole in the ability of the federal government to act. It's just a reality. And we have to understand we're under attack here in the state of Washington as well. So it's very unfortunate. We now have a Supreme Court that is hell-bent for election as an unelected Supreme Court that was packed by Mitch McConnell to take away the ability of Washington to protect, or the federal government to protect a women's right of reproductive health. They've wanted to take away the ability of the federal government to protect us from gun violence. And now they're acting to take away the ability of the federal government to protect us from pollution. And it's a cry and shame. And it's a cry and shame, frankly, because we used to have a Republican Party that helped on the environment. Bill Ruckelshaus, Republican first EPA administrator, did tremendous work. And now we can't get a Republican in the state of Washington to bend over and pick up a bill anytime, anywhere to protect our health. So we got more work to do in the state of Washington. With that, happy to take questions.
If you're with the media and have questions, if you want to raise your hand, and then I can call on you that way. So we're getting everybody. All right, I saw Bellamy first. Go ahead, Bellamy.
Yeah, hi, Governor. Are there specific things that will have to change as a result of this ruling in Washington State? Because of this, things that regulations that will have to come down. I know you've said we need to double down, but are there things that you'll have to change?
Not in the immediate future on this specific decision. As I indicated, our Centralia coal plant, through our own measures, is going to be transitioned to cleaner sources of energy based on our own decisions under our own jurisdiction. So that should not derail the progress we're making there. However, the nature of this decision, and I have not read the decision yet, I've just had it relayed to me, but the nature of the decision is a sweeping evisceration of the ability of the federal government on a host of environmental laws to be able to move forward. And as Senator Carlisle pointed out, in many of our environmental laws, we have to depend on the executive branch to help effectuate some of these bills. And at least from what I've had described to me, this calls in real question the ability of the Environmental Protection Agency to do its job on a host of measures which can affect us here. We have Superfund sites. I'm looking at it across the largest one on the West Coast in Puget Sound, right in Eagle Harbor. We have cleanups at Hanford. We have a host of environmental laws where we need the Environmental Protection Agency to be able to protect Washingtonians. And we ought to be super concerned that this is just the opening salvo of a Republican Supreme Court gutting our ability to effectuate environmental laws. And as I said, it's not only shameful, but it's extremely sad because we used to have two parties that might have done a little bit of work for the environment. We only have one right now. So I just want to tell you that this underscores that we have to be alert to protect our environment, not just on carbon, not just on climate change, but on all of our laws, because we're going to have an EPA realizing it that's driving on one flat tire. And that's just reality given what the Supreme Court is doing.
Thank you.
Rachel with AP, go ahead with your question.
Governor, you said this ruling won't affect the workaround closing of TransAlta. Is that still on track to occur by 2025? And can you kind of give an update on the status of that? And then also, given the regional impacts that you mentioned, such as wildfires, are there discussions with other state leaders on the West Coast on what policies might be approached as a region that would be most effective on addressing those concerns?
Yeah, I don't see any, I have not been alerted to any slowdown on the TransAlta transition. That appears to be moving forward. If there is something, I have not heard about it. So that's good news. On the West Coast Collaborative, we collaborate, at least almost every week, working with our West Coast partners, including British Columbia, to collaborate on measures. And we're doing that in a whole host of ways. We are working to find a way to merge our market on our Climate Commitment Act with other states. And the reason we're doing that is that the larger the market for permits under the Clean Commitment Act, the cheaper the cost will be to everybody concerned, including the polluting industries. So everyone should have an interest in fashioning our Climate Commitment Act implementation in a way that will reach a common market with other states that will minimize the cost to everyone involved. So we're talking about them frequently. I talked to Governor Newsom about this last month, and those efforts will continue.
Next up, Melissa. Go ahead, Melissa, with your question.
Hi, Governor. You talked a lot about natural gas, and I'm wondering what you think the legislature may need to do to, address natural gas in buildings. Do you support, for instance, a ban on cooking with natural gas or stoves with natural gas in residences?
No, we are not going to be proposing requiring people to remove their stoves. That is not in any discussion. But this is not natural gas, it is dirty gas. The word natural suggests it's benign. It's actually toxic, it's dirty. When you burn it in your house, either for heating or cooking, you're releasing all kinds of dirty, toxic material, including carcinogens that can cause cancer. The most recent report that was released last week is that the new science, and again, we have to react to new science. We're a science-oriented state. It's one of the reasons our COVID response was so successful. And the new science shows that benzene is now released in much higher amounts than were originally assumed in stovetop cooking. And we know if we're going to meet our climate change gas goals, we cannot have decades from now continuing to use this dirty gas. It's a health impact right today when you use it in your home, and it is a long-term health impact because it causes climate change, which burns our forest down, and you can't breathe because of forest fire smoke. So it's a health hazard. So what I anticipate is there is a decision that may be reached in the legislature in the upcoming session. We need to confirm what will be the existing law of the state of Washington by next January, that we will not do new hookups, I believe after the year 2023, so that we can use cleaner sources of energy that are abundantly available to us through electrifying our homes, both in our heating and in our cooking. And I know people love these range top stoves. Microsoft loved them, their chefs loved them. But when they got inductive cooking, they loved them even more using electricity because they're extremely effective in cooking. So this will not be proposed to remove anyone's stove, but it does make sense in the upcoming years to stop digging the hole. When you're in a hole, stop digging. And that makes sense to do. So that will be before the legislature, I presume. And we're going to need, again, we always need to do that. We need to doubly make that commitment today, now that the federal government is on the sidelines to some degree when it comes to reducing carbon pollution. So that'll be before the legislators. And again, the reason I'm having this discussion with you today is, look, the health of our children is at risk right here. 10-year-old kids are getting asthma today and can't breathe. And if you've ever seen a kid have an asthma attack, it's pretty disturbing. Those kids can't breathe because we've got a dirty gas coming out in our homes. And it's financed by giant polluting industries of the gas and oil industry, which I may add is not exactly being beneficial to us right now when it comes to gas and oil prices. And they want to continue to pollute our homes. That's just not right. And so we're going to have to stand up and protect our children in this regard. And it's going to take legislators to act eventually. And I believe that we will, as long as we continue to have some people who care about the environment in the legislature. And frankly, those are Democrats.
All right, we have one time for one more quick question. Hannah, go ahead with your question.
Hi, I'm just curious, this can be for anyone. We've already got a patchwork across the country, some states not taking action to fight climate change like we have here in Washington state. With a decision like this at the federal level, what good do our efforts do, or even doing more in Washington when not everybody is playing along?
Let me tackle that first because I've been very involved in this. We started a thing called the U.S. Climate Alliance. It's an alliance of now, I believe, 25 states, 25 governors. And these states have all committed themselves to tackling climate change. This is a large group. It represents about 60%, I think, of the population and over half of the United States economy. And it represents states, actually, it's interesting, these states have the best economy. The group that of states that have committed to fight climate change actually have a better economic growth than those that have not, because growing clean energy jobs is very effective. As you know, it's effective here. The Sela company is going to hire hundreds of people in Moses Lake building batteries. We have the largest manufacturer of solar panels in Bellingham in the Western Hemisphere. First Mode is building one of the largest fuel cell engines in Soto in Seattle. We are hiring thousands of people in the clean energy industry. I was at Torrey in Frederickson yesterday that makes, the material for energy efficient airplanes, so we burn less fuel. We are a clean energy hub. We're building a clean energy economy. We're putting thousands of people to work, and other states are doing the same. So over half of the United States is going to continue to move forward against climate change. We are not alone. And all of those states are saying the same thing I am this morning. That's good to know. But half the states are not, because the federal government has now been, to some degree sidelined, or at least made more difficult to act. That's why we have to pick up the pace here.
And I'll just add, no, go ahead, Ruben.
Oh, I was just going to say, at the UN Climate Summit, everyone worldwide was interested in state level action in the US, county level action, city level action, because they knew that there wasn't bold action happening at the federal level, and now we have even less authority. So it's a bottom up approach. We know that we need a partner in the federal government, but that doesn't in any way reduce the intensity and the intentionality of city, county, state, and municipal, other local action. And that's what we're seeing in states around the country.
Excuse me, I need to excuse myself. I'm going to try to get another phone, but I have a deal with the ferries. If I'm not there at the scheduled hour, they leave. So I'm going to get on another phone if you guys can continue. Thank you.
I'll just add that our policies that we've adopted in this state are not just intended to address fossil fuels that are combusted in our state. We are also accountable for the materials that we use and for the life cycle carbon intensity of the energy that we import into state. So for example, our clean fuel standard, which we've adopted and modeled on the California and Oregon programs, the existence of clean fuel standards along the West Coast has led producers of biofuels in the Midwest to clean up their whole supply chain, so that ethanol refineries in Iowa that used to get their electricity from coal now derive their electricity from wind, because that means that fuel scores better on the West Coast clean fuels markets. That's also one of the reasons that we're interested in pursuing Representative Dewar's bill on building materials, which looks at the full life cycle greenhouse gas intensity of things like cement and steel and wood that we use to build buildings. So we need to look at all the ways in which our economy is interlaced with other states' economies, and think about ways in which Washington state policy can incentivize greenhouse gas reductions beyond our borders, because we know a molecule of carbon dioxide emitted in Iowa impacts our climate as much as a molecule emitted here in Washington state.
And we are going to have to wrap this up. If the media has any other questions, feel free to email me or anyone else on the communications team. I don't think the governor will make it back on, so I think that's it.